Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving straight into what I think is one of the most extreme corporate paradoxes in the modern business world. We are unpacking the incredibly delicate, honestly fascinating art of marketing tobacco.
Just imagine it for a second. You're trying to build brand loyalty, you're rolling out new product lines, and you're trying to reach entirely new markets, all while operating under some of the absolute strictest advertising rules on the planet. It is the ultimate corporate tightrope walk. You've got this undeniable business mandate to grow, right? But doing so means navigating an absolute minefield of health warnings, total advertising bans, and the constant threat of multi-million-dollar penalties.
So, here's our roadmap for This Explainer. We're going to define the tobacco standard, explore this global marketing tightrope, open up the WHO FCTC rulebook, quantify the financial threats of lawsuits, and finally, look at preserving the social license.
All right, Section 1. Defining the tobacco standard.
So, our entire discussion today is really rooted in a major global financial framework, the SASB standards. These are now governed by the IFRS Foundation, and they're essentially the gold standard for sustainability reporting. If you're analyzing a company's market position, this matters. Why? Because these standards require entities to pinpoint the exact risks and opportunities that directly impact their cash flows, their access to finance, and their overall prospects over the short, medium, and long term. Now, to understand how tobacco companies specifically report these risks, we have to look at the Sustainable Industry Classification System, or SICS. The code we're laser-focused on today is FBTB. This designates the food and beverage tobacco sector. The entities governed by this specific code manufacture the whole shebang, everything from traditional cigarettes and cigars right down to the new smokeless tobacco products.
Moving right along, Section 2. The global marketing tightrope.
The very first sentence of the topic summary in the SASB standards sets the stage perfectly. It says, tobacco product labeling and marketing is regulated heavily internationally. The source material makes it abundantly clear right out of the gate. Tobacco companies operate in a completely unique, incredibly scrutinized global environment. It's not just a patchwork of local laws. We're talking about a highly coordinated international regulatory net. The central conflict here is stark. On one hand, falling demand for traditional cigarettes means these companies have a massive business mandate to market harm reduction products, think non-tobacco nicotine products and heated tobacco devices, just to survive. But on the exact opposite side, you have incredibly strict international regulations specifically designed to stop people from using tobacco entirely. So the ultimate tightrope is trying to balance that vital market reach with absolute, down-to-the-letter regulatory compliance. Which brings us to Section 3, the WHFCT rulebook. Because really, who exactly is setting the rules for this tightrope walk? Enter the global heavyweight champion of regulation, the World Health Organization's Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, or the WHO FCT. The SASB standard explicitly names this framework as the primary driver that's encouraging countries to introduce new, stricter regulatory approaches. And their main goal? Preventing early-age tobacco use through brutally transparent advertising about tobacco's health risks. Under the SASB metrics, companies actually have to explicitly defend their alignment with two heavy-hitting articles of the WHO FCT. First up, Article 11. This one governs packaging, completely banning misleading terms like light or mild and dictating the exact size, color, and imagery of health warnings. And then you have Article 13, which takes an absolute sledgehammer to direct advertising. We're talking virtually banning it across TV, print, outdoor billboards, point-of-sale displays, and even digital platforms like mobile phones. But here's the kicker. Regulators don't just stop at direct TV or print ads. Article 13 also forces companies to disclose their policies on indirect marketing practices, which is where things get really fascinating. We are talking about the free distribution of products in the mail, promotional discounts, brand stretching, like putting a tobacco brand name on a non-tobacco service, and brand sharing, which is exactly the reverse. It even scrutinizes product placement in films and TV, and yes, even corporate social responsibility sponsorships. The net is cast incredibly wide to catch literally any indirect promotion. So, Section 4, the financial threat of lawsuits. What actually happens when a company slips off this regulatory tightrope?
Well, when companies slip, it hits the bottom line hard. A specific quantitative metric, FBTB 270A.1, demands that companies track the absolute financial devastation of crossing the line. Investors don't just want a nice narrative apology. They want to see the exact presentation currency lost to legal proceedings. The metric specifically asks for the total monetary losses from legal proceedings associated with marketing, labeling, or advertising practices. This includes enforcement of laws on health claims, nutrient claims, unfair or deceptive claims, and misbranded labeling. See, the industry has a long history of facing a multi-front threat, costly legal battles from individuals, governments, and corporations. Anyone tracking these companies needs to see the real dollar amount lost to these enforcement actions to properly assess the risk.
And the sheer scope of these disclosures is comprehensive. They capture civil actions like judgments or settlements. They capture regulatory proceedings, which means government penalties, disgorgement, and restitution. And they even capture criminal actions. Interestingly, the standard specifically notes that these figures must exclude legal defense fees. So what we are looking at is pure penalty money. Furthermore, companies must briefly describe the nature of these losses, like was it a guilty plea or a settlement, and outline any corrective actions they took in response, whether that's changing their operations, their management, or their business partners.
Finally, Section 5, preserving the social license.
Navigating all of this complex marketing regulation isn't just about protecting this quarter's earnings. It's about basic corporate survival. The SASB text explicitly warns, and I quote, "Failing to effectively manage negative social externalities may result in further unfavorable regulation and may impair the industry's social license to operate." That is a highly consequential statement. If you push too hard on the marketing tightrope, you don't just get a fine. Society and regulators may actually revoke your fundamental right to do business.
But according to the SASB standard, companies that actually manage these issues effectively can reap major benefits. By moving step by step to manage these negative social externalities, they actively avoid the extraordinary expenses of those legal battles we just discussed. And in doing so, they decrease their contingent liabilities, the looming threat of future fines, and ultimately they are able to preserve their market share in a highly competitive, declining traditional market.
Because these regulations apply globally, but local laws can naturally vary wildly, the SASB standard adds a fascinating final requirement. Entities have to explicitly describe any materially distinct practices they employ in various markets. But more importantly, they must describe instances or regions where their marketing policies are not aligned with the WAOF-CTC. Think about that. They literally have to point out to investors exactly where they are most vulnerable, exposing where their global practices deviate from the gold standard of the World Health Organization.
So, with the WHF-CTC pushing for ever stricter rules, the financial penalties for missteps climbing into the millions, and the absolute business necessity of marketing new products to survive, how long can these companies continue to balance? As regulations tighten, can tobacco companies successfully maintain their social license to operate, or is this a global marketing tightrope that will eventually snap? It's a massive question every investor and observer of this space has to weigh heavily. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning what's behind the disclosures.